Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Q&A for this week. We are on Module 4, Week 1. Very exciting, and we have been discussing parts of the self. And this is not to say that your questions necessarily have to be related to the topic of the week, but oftentimes they are. It's going to be very interesting to see where this conversation goes, because we got two very interesting questions. And so the first one is, you have been talking about the parts of the self, and I want to know more. What are the parts of the self and how can I get to know them? And I think this is very interesting because it takes a while to metabolize this idea.
Mhm.
Like, people are not always in touch with this idea of parts. And like we were discussing this week in the live, a lot of different theories and philosophies have been talking about how consciousness really is more of a dialogue than a monologue,
Mhm.
because for a thought to sort of like process forward, you need different viewpoints.
Mhm.
Like we were saying, like, oh, I really want some ice cream. Oh, but I really shouldn't. I mean, that really sounds like two people talking.
Mhm.
And if it's just one point, repeating its point over and over again, like how can you have a thought that just proceeds forward? You can't, because it's just that one point. Ideas need to come from different points. How do you have a conversation otherwise? And in Jungian psychology and dialogical self theory and so many psychological theories and philosophies, people talk about these parts or these positions or these alters. Even Freud had the ego, id, alter ego. There's been this idea,
Mhm.
really in many forms, that we have different parts, different voices inside of us. And a lot of people can kind of sense that, but it can also be a little bit strange initially to metabolize. So that's why we help sort of like explaining a context, and then we tell people like, oh, you might have heard of the inner child
Mhm.
or the inner critic or the shadow, like these sort of like more typical ones.
Mhm.
And they can mean something different for everyone. I think the inner critic is always the first one that pops up, because everyone has that experience of the voice that says, wow, you didn't do that well, or I suck at this, or whatever the case may be. And it's like, well, who is that? And is that all of you, or is that just one part of you?
Mhm.
And how can we address that? So I think as always, there's a lot here. What do you think, Stephanie?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit on something really important is that, first of all, it looks different for everybody. So, the reason that these kind of archetypal parts of self have become known is that lots of people have experiences with inner critic, this critical voice in your head that's always telling you you're not good enough, or you're not capable or competent or talented or whatever it is, or you really messed that up, or um, a lot of us have experience like that, so we call it the inner critic. A lot of us have experience with an inner child, you know and a lot of the times I think if you don't know your inner child, or if you've never gone through an exercise of trying to contact your inner child, because it wasn't part of the question, like how do I
Yeah, how do
yeah.
I get to know them?
So I mean, I would say, really think of a memory that sticks in your head that was maybe an upsetting memory or a traumatic memory, or something that, like, something you remember that was hurtful in your past, and think about the you that was in that experience. And that, for me, is the best way to find your inner child. I mean, I can think back to an experience of me being so upset, having to practice the piano, and my fingers are cold, and and I feel so traumatized because I have to do this, and my mom is being, whatever. Like, I could go into that memory, and that me who was in that experience and who was traumatized by that experience is still there somewhere. So then I can kind of like go back to that experience. And so I would say, for inner child stuff, really for any of the parts of self, to you can access them through memories a lot of the time. And then that's how you get rolling, then you can find other memories of with your inner child. And your inner, you can have lots of inner children,
Mhm.
or inner adolescent, inner whatever.
Yeah.
It's whatever works for you. Another way I would say that you can access them is by thinking about different parts of your personality, or different things that come up in you at different times. Like, if, let's say, I mean, I definitely, there's a part of me that's the inner musician.
Mhm.
That is a very, I'm really connected with that part of me, and that part takes up a little more space than some of my other parts, because so think about the things that you like to do. Like Eliza, we were just talking about a client who has an inner couch potato. I definitely have an inner couch potato. I celebrate that inner couch potato.
Me too.
Right?
1000%.
Exactly. So just think about like the different ways that you go um, throughout life, and the things that you like, and the things that you do, and the way that your personality presents itself. And then that's how you can find those parts of you. Does that make sense? Because I mean, for somebody who's not used to doing this work, yeah, okay, I'm just sitting there like, I don't know what parts of self are there. How do I know?
Mhm.
So use a memory, use something that you like, something that you do. Let's say, okay, I work 60 hours a week at my job. Okay, find your inner workaholic.
Mhm.
That, and really get in touch with that part of you who needs to work all the time, who maybe finds worth through the work you do, who, right? So
Yeah.
just examine your life, examine the way that you move through the world, and find the different parts of you that do and think and feel different things. And that'll be a clue of how to find your inner parts. And again,
Absolutely.
they can look different for everyone, you know?
And they can feel different,
Yes.
like sometimes you might feel like, oh, suddenly you're kind of like feeling very shy, and your body's getting smaller and your voice is getting higher, and that alone can kind of signal to you like, is this my inner child? And then you kind of think of it as, how am I feeling in my body? Yeah, I would feel this way a lot as a kid,
Right.
or I would feel this way a lot as a teenager. Like even those sensations can help guide who is this
Right.
person, or when you're making a decision.
Right.
For me, I have a lot of fun at the supermarket
Uh-huh.
with parts of the self, because every part wants to buy something different.
Right.
And it's actually helped me to think, who wants to buy this? I mean, if it's Nutella, it's not my higher self.
Yeah. Right.
Definitely not my higher self.
Absolutely.
When I pick a movie to watch, who wants to see what?
Right.
Generally the inner child wins.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're here to help you discover this,
Right.
like you don't have to tackle this on your own. We're
Exactly.
here to help walk you through the process.
And we always say too, and really hold firm to this belief, like there's knowing something theoretically, like understanding a concept, but then there's actually knowing it here, being able to internalize it or have the experience, like, oh, I just really found my inner self, like, or my inner child. Now, oh, now I get it. Like, rather than knowing how you think it should be, or how your inner child should look or act or whatever, there's a difference between knowing it in theory and knowing it in experience. So we just would like to encourage you to just sit with it yourself and see. I mean, obviously we're here to help you, but like, see what comes up naturally for you within yourself, not like what should be coming up. I'm going to try to find my inner critic. Rather than that, maybe just going inward and being like, what do I remember that still bothers me?
Mhm.
Or what memory do I hold on to that I still feel really connected to? What part of me was there? And then what is that part still in me, needing something, needing approval, needing validation, needing whatever?
Exactly. Exactly. That is so important. Such an important process.
Yeah.
Speaking of process, this leads us to the next question, which is very interesting. It's a very well informed question. what does it mean that someone is fragmented? And,
Mm,
generally when we think about the fragmented psyche, again, it kind of like goes back to parts of the self a little bit.
right.
In my experience, this idea that someone feels internally fragmented really correlates with how much trauma the person has had.
Mhm.
I mean, I can't point to any science around it, but definitely having discussions with mentors and supervisors. And in our experience and in my experience as a therapist, I have seen, anecdotally at least, a correlation between the severity of trauma,
Mhm.
how chronic the trauma has been, how early it started,
Right.
and the person's fragmentation. Because I think chronic experiences early in life affect the sense of self that
Yes.
the person has, the sense of self, the sense of security. It's much different when we're talking about someone who had, a car crash at age 20, which of course is
Mhm.
incredibly traumatic,
Right.
but probably not in a way that fragments the psyche as much as being called stupid from age 3 to age
Right.
17,
Right. Yeah.
and other things too.
Mhm.
So, in my experience, when people are fragmented, the parts of the self, it's almost like they don't see each other. It's almost like they have a little bit of a life of their own.
Mhm.
It's almost like you will see the person embody the parts a bit more, but without a lot of awareness.
Right.
Interesting, because then if we think about some of the extreme consequences of trauma, we can think of a disorder like dissociative identity disorder, when
Right.
the person's parts have literally,
Literally manifested as the personality. Yeah. Mhm.
yeah. For those of you who don't know, this used to be known as multiple personality disorder.
Mhm. Mhm.
And the person was thought to have these different personalities until they actually realized that this fragmentation is a result of trauma and it's of dissociative nature.
Mhm.
And that's why these different parts come out. But these parts generally, I don't know if I can say that this is the case always, but don't really have a whole knowledge of each other,
Right.
and sort of like take the wheel
Yeah.
of the psyche of the person. And in a lesser form, I think I have seen that with fragmentation in general.
Yes.
Like if I ask the person, can you tell me about your inner child? Can you see your inner child? It's very hard for them to not just be the child.
Right.
In that moment, they are the child. It's very hard for them to just see the child and maybe call upon another part.
Mhm.
It's almost like there's no separation.
Yeah.
Everything is right here.
Yep. Yep.
And then once they start taking a step back, they get a stronger sense of the inner society of the self,
Yes.
as they call it in dialogical self theory. I love it, the mini society of the self.
Yeah.
And that fragmentation starts becoming better because the parts start getting to know each other, seeing each other,
Mhm.
tending to each other's needs.
Mhm.
It's very interesting how that process happens, but it takes some work. What is your take on all this?
I actually couldn't have said it better. Yeah, it's the whole idea, and I'm just going to be reiterating here, but the whole idea of that they are not integrated together. So, like you said, they're not aware of each other, the selves, or you are unable to take a step back from like an observation kind of standpoint and see that there are these different. It's just, you know, you just go right into it and you act out that inner part, but you're not aware that there are other parts, right? So the integration, I would say, is what's missing um, from somebody who is fragmented.
Mm-hmm.
Integration and awareness of like a greater picture of all the parts, and that all the parts are part of a whole.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
And
but
when there
that's yeah,
is, yeah, when there is a sense of fragmentation, I would say that's especially when we like to offer support, because it's very difficult to go through that process on your own. I mean, you
right,
really need for
right.
someone to help guide
Well,
you.
and we were talking about this actually the other day on the live, like with clients who experience either like substance abuse, addiction, or like eating disorders, these very like highly shame based things.
Mhm.
Like, let's say, for example, if somebody is bulimic and they think that that is all of them, that the addiction to that, that the behavior, that the the craving, all of that stuff is all of them, rather than just the part of you that has that unmet needs. And that's why you do the behaviors. That's why you have the thoughts, is because that part of you has unmet needs. Same with an addiction. You know, there's the addicted part of you, but that it's not all of you. And so I think having this awareness, then it enables you to really start working with yourself, rather than like, I'm always going to be like this because this is who I am. This is what I am. Rather than looking at it like, no, this is a part of me. This is just a part of me. But there's a part of me that's not an addicted part of me.
Yeah.
So I need to bring all of this. I need to integrate. I need to synthesize these parts. And I need to find out from the parts of me that are making me do these behaviors. What are you lacking? What are you missing? What do you need? You know, and then have the other parts of me, maybe the higher self that's beyond fear, guilt, and shame. Maybe the higher self can step in and help give this suffering part of me a little bit of what it needs.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes we'll help you do this creatively, you know,
Yes.
like what do these parts look like on paper? That can already help
Exactly.
separate a little bit. What do they sound like if we play them through instruments?
Right.
You know, it takes that level of separation also, because in this mini society of the self, there's different levels of power
Mhm.
that parts have, and only taking that distance you actually are able to shift the power around.
Right.
Yeah, sometimes people don't even imagine, oh, I didn't realize that I could actually challenge this part. I
Right.
thought this part would run my life forever, but no, I can actually react and say, no, this is no longer tolerated.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great questions.
So
I mean, this really gets into some big stuff, but
this really gets into some big stuff. You all will probably have more questions after we have answered these questions. So let us know. We're here for you. This is a lifelong conversation in my experience. So
yeah.
yeah. Well, thank you all. And we're here if you need anything.
Thanks.